Hello. Hi, Kushwa. Hi, Vector Ride. How are you doing? Welcome to our first Did You Know That? So it definitely helps that Kyle walks into my office and tells me the Power Rangers Marathon has just started at this time. So nothing like going up against something large. So I'm going to be looking at this in a different way in the sense that the idea here, hey, effects animator, is to give you guys an opportunity to dive a little bit more into features, and we can really take a look at those and see, um, find out a little bit more information about them. So I want this to be very interactive, so you can definitely fire away the questions. I'll be keeping my eye on that. Of course, several of the Pixelogic people are also in here. Hello, everybody. Rybot and Harry and Enrique. And hold on, there's a glare on my screen now. Cloud. So welcome uh, to everything. So again, the Did You Know That is something I actually started about 8 years ago. And it was something I would make YouTube videos for. So I want to bring this back and have it be an opportunity for us to look at features. So today's feature we're going to dive into is FiberMesh. I want to take some time to really look at this. So what we're going to do for these segments is I'll spend the whatever 35 minutes, 45 minutes, hour talking about the features, things that I think are important, items that I find I encounter a lot when I'm in my travels or when I'm speaking to any artist, whether it be at a studio or with any other pipeline. And then we'll take questions as we go along here. And then at the end, we will continue to take questions. So that's kind of how we're going to go with this. The next topic that we would cover, which I go again in a few weeks, so on the 28th, we're going to have you decide. So we're going to do a polling. In the bottom corner, left corner, you can see that the next topic you can choose. Kingsley will be putting putting the link there so you guys can actually do the polling. Right? So there's the first four. If you guys have another topic that you're interested in talking about and that we can put in the straw poll, then you'll want to go ahead and send that to streaming@pixelogic.com. Kingsley can put that email in there as well. So let's get going in this and let's dive into this. So I want to cover a couple little things here. So I have like a rules that I kind of live on and live by for FiberMesh, and I found during the development and during when we were creating this, uh, these were kind of the 6 rules that if I at least started with a foundation of this and went with these, I would always get a really great result and get me most of the way before I started getting into the grooming brushes. Which these are the grooming brushes, and we'll touch base on these a little bit. And I'll show you where in ZBrush you can actually manipulate the settings for this. And I'll show you a couple things that I like to do with some of these brushes. So that's what all these brushes here are. So these ones that start with groom means you're grooming your fiber mesh. Okay? So I'm going to walk you through the 6 rules that I like to live on when I'm doing this. So the first one that is important would be masking. Okay? So for those that have used fiber mesh before, you'll understand that obviously wherever you mask is where you get your fibers. So if I'm beginning to put my mask along here, then I can control my fibers that way. So the reason why this is a rule for me is it also involves the blurring of the mask as well. Okay, because as we blur our mask, right, we're obviously getting kind of a blurred edging here, right? That plays an important role in fiber mesh. But what that also comes into play with is the second rule, which is your polygon count, right? So right now I'm sitting at 707,000, right? So if I walk down a little bit, and I go ahead and blur, I get a stronger blur to happen because I have less polygons compared to if we undo this and we walk back up to our 700,000 and I start blurring this. You can see it's very faint in essence to see that blurring. Okay, the reason why this is important is when we go to create our fiber meshes, that blurring of the mask is actually going to be a controller for the size of fibers and kind of so if we create this really quick, okay, and say we get some fibers here, let's go a little bit smaller. And I'm going to go through all these settings, so don't worry about this. Right? I just I've had this guy had some feathers already on him. So what I'm referring to is you can see if we get a little bit closer down here, especially you see that one right there and that one right there, the fibers are actually a little bit smaller. The length is not as much as, say, the ones that are in the main part of your masking. So this is why it's important, those two rules, they kind of work together, right? And the fact that your masking capability is going to play a role on what you're doing, okay? And then number two, the polygons. So it's not also just for blurring your mask. So again, if I want a bigger blur, we all know that you walk down a couple levels, right, to get a bigger blur. And then if I now want to preview this, right, I'm going to start getting a little bit different results. Here, I'm going to make the coverage even smaller. Oh, now he's just looking like he's losing his hair. Okay, and if you want, you can hide your mask. Control H actually will hide your mask. So that's the same thing as going to the masking menu here and hitting this View Mask. You can see the shortcut right there is Control H. Now I have a balding bird here. So the masking can come into play, but the polygons come into play as well because they also are being used to control kind of the fibers themselves as far as the size or the density along the edge. So you can see there's a lot smaller ones through here, right? Along that edge where that masking blurring is happening. They're not as long and as wide like you have here at the top of the head. Okay, so those are two of my first rules that I like to use as kind of foundation. Okay, I bring up the polygon one because it's probably not worth making fibers on something that's like 20 million or 10 million. You're actually better off walking down some subdivision levels and being more in like the million range, a couple 100,000 range, okay? Because you'll just have a better reaction to the FiberMesh. Also, when you guys are using FiberMesh, I would highly recommend, obviously you're planning to pose a character after. Once the character's posed, that's when I would do a FiberMesh. Because what we're doing is creating multiple fibers. So that leads into another rule, which is how many fibers is being created. So right here, in this, what I like to call this kind of the cockpit right here of FiberMesh, this is just telling you the number of fibers to make, right? So this is in the thousands. So if I put 10 in here, this is 10,000. Now, when you do this, along the top here, you're going to see right here, it tells you how many thousands of vertex points do you have in FiberMesh. So this has got 340,000 vertex points. So this isn't going to pose relatively easy because there is 10,000 fibers being made that equal 340,000 polygons. So this is why I would recommend, if you're going to be using fibers on a character, you're probably going to want to do it on a posed character. Then that's when you start adding the fibers. Okay? So that's a third rule for me, is how many fibers do I really need? And believe it or not, if you go do some research, a different hair color actually has different number of spans of hair on a head in a human and different thicknesses. I don't remember the exact. I think red, if I remember right, was like the thicker hair, but also the less hair. And I think blonde had the most hair. I don't remember, but I know when we made this, we were researching that and found those interesting facts out. So that's kind of where also that comes into play. Now, the other thing that becomes important, I'm going to turn off your FiberMesh here. And a question I get a lot about is stylizing your FiberMesh. Okay? So polygrouping is going to be very crucial in doing this. So if I want kind of that nice fibers that's happening to him down here, maybe through here, but I want maybe longer fibers up here, it would make sense to use polygrouping. Okay, so obviously when you make polygroups, it's best to go to the lowest subdivision level when you're doing this. Okay, so as I mask out through here, okay, I want to get maybe here, I'm going to make this a new polygroup. Right, so I can just Control W, and then now we got that green polygroup. Now I'm going to want a different hair length there. So in essence, think about every polygroup is it's going to become its own subtool, right? So now if I come through here and I start masking here and I create a polygroup, right? Think about that blue now is becoming a new polygroup. Now when you're doing this, there's going to be times where you don't want the mask to bleed into the green. Like, so for example, if I'm doing this and then now I'm going a little bit into the green here, right? I really wanted that green to stay. So if I hit Control W now, see I'm losing the consistent that I wanted in that green portion. So I'm going to undo this. I'm going to clear the mask. And then this is something that you can do. What you can do is in the brush palette, okay, in auto masking, right here there's a slider called mask by polygroups. So if I turn this all the way up to 100, this is a global setting. Okay? So what this is doing is creating this mask on every single brush right now in ZBrush. So if I hold Control now and I start painting on the purple, I can't now go into the green. So you see my cursor's in the green and it's not masking. So I can only butt right up into the green. And I like using this for when I start using panel looping as well for making, like, say, some kind of suit for a character. And then there you go. So I know this is always going to stay consistent. So the same thing here. Now if I come back here and start painting on the purple here, I know I can't touch the pink and the green. Right? So if I polygroup that, and I'm using, for those that don't know, I'm using Control W to do a new polygroup is what I'm making. Okay? So again, I'm masking and just saying, yeah, this is going to be a whole nother, maybe another different kind of fiber, and then Control W. Oh, I missed a spot. I'm going to undo and then just make sure I get that masked off, and we'll Control W that. Okay? So this comes in handy, and again, we're thinking about this in stages or steps. I'm trying to create fibers kind of by subtool basis. Okay? So this then would be its own mesh. So now I can just look at this piece and tell it to preview, and now all 10,000 of those fibers are happening to just this one polygroup, right? So now if I'm showing everything here, I probably would want to do more something like, here, let me mask it, and then show, so now I can get that same mask every single time, preview it, and you can see how dense that is getting now on the top, right? So I've created the same settings, but because the grouping is a lot smaller, that masking smaller, that 10,000 is being pushed through that little polygroup now. So then I can say, I accept this, right? And now ZBrush is going to ask you, hey, this is quite a bit of fibers. Do you want to go into a fast preview mode? So I'm gonna say yes, just so we can cover this and understand what this does for you. So note that the fibers take on the polygrouping, right? So you can see they're green because that's the polygroup that I was drawing on, right? So we open our subtool palette and we look at just these fibers. You can see that's what I'm getting, and I'm getting some of the other polygroup based upon the fact that my mask was blurring over a little bit. Okay, so you can see that this polygrouping comes in handy. So now I can look at just the green, or I can even flip it and only look at these portions. And this is going to lead me to be able to start grooming and make things a little bit easier when I groom. Okay, but then I can go back now and I can say, you know what, I actually want to have these two polygroups. And again, to select multiple polygroups, right? So if I wanted to select all three of these polygroups, there is a way to do that. Okay, so if I'm going to this point right here, and I'll make my brush size smaller so we can really focus on that. This point right here, and I hold down that Control Shift and I click, you can see it gives me all three of these polygroups at once. Okay, because this vertex point right here is sharing three polygroups. So if I only wanted, say, this pink and this yellow here, I would go to one of these points along this and just hold down that Control Shift and tap, and I would get those two polygroups, right? So maybe I want all three, okay, and I want to have that mask, and then I'm going to go ahead and preview that, and now you can see, based upon what I'm doing here, the result I start to get is now a little bit different, even though I've not changed any settings, because those first two rules are starting to come into play that I started this with. It's looking at the polygon count, right, that we're creating from, and it's now looking at the mask. So this mask is larger, so it's got to spread this number of fibers over a larger section. So it's now not as dense as we have here at the top. So if I accept this, it's going to ask me to go in fast preview mode, and then there you have it. Right? So you can see he's getting a little balding in there, right there. He's got a little bald problem. But you see it's way more dense up here on the top for him. Now we've got some bird with a human haircut. So what's happening is when we hit this accept, again, we're creating a subtool. And notice that the subtools take on the polygroups below. So again, this is helpful for me to select pieces that I want to work on. So I'll turn this off so you can see I'm only working with this piece. Right? I can select out each polygroup that I want. Okay, and I can say, oh, I had this guy masked off. I don't want that masked off, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete those hidden now, right? Because I already had them in this group. Okay, so I'm creating, for every group or any situation, I'm creating a subtool. So think about different hair lengths. If you take my crazy hair right now, you know, the front here is a little bit longer, right, than the back. So this would be its own polygroup. And then the little hair I have here on the side, that would be another polygroup. So this is the idea and the concept I want you guys to start figuring out and understanding, because it's also going to help when we get into grooming down the line here. Okay, so what's happening with fast preview, since we've said yes to that, is I'm going to close the geometry here. Down here at the bottom, there are more options to FiberMesh. Okay, so if we open up preview settings, you can see it's turned on because I told it to go ahead and turn it on when we accepted the FiberMesh. So I can turn it off at any time, and then this is what we're going to get. So I'm going to turn that off, and you can see the fibers that we have. So I'm going to turn it back on, and you can see what that does. It's kind of limiting the FiberMesh themselves for rendering purposes, so it keeps a very fast workflow. But what you can also do is reduce the polygon count of previewing it, right? So this is going to help looking at fewer fibers, but they're kind of all connected still. So this would be like the same thing if we went into another application and now we want to use another kind of plugin in another application to go along the hair. You actually can do that. So that's where these export curves come into play. So if I click on this button, I'll be able to export to a .ma Maya file, an OBJ, a Modo file, a Lightwave file. So you could use even these fiber meshes as a guide in any other application. Okay, so that's all Fast Preview is doing. It's allowing you to view least number of fibers that you've told to create, and then telling it to be just show me actually a thin representation of the fibers. Where I turn this off, see they're actually a little bit thicker, right? But I'm telling it not to show me that by turning on the Fast Preview. Right, so that's all that Fast Preview is doing, and it can become helpful, especially when you start getting into the grooming. They can come in very helpful for you. All right, so let's continue on this journey here of some more of my rules that I like to live by. Okay, so now we're understanding here that I've got polygrouping, I'm using mask, I'm using the polygons. I know if let's just create just in this piece right here, just use this whole little section and hit preview. So now I've got these 10,000 fibers going across a larger masking group. The next rule that I live on, which is probably the most important rule, I just can't start with it because you got to start with first how to even create fibers. But to me, the most important rule down here is this segments rule. So this segment slider is very important. This segment slider is in essence controlling the number of polygons you get per fiber, right? So right now it's at 16. So every single one of these 10,000 fibers have 16 polygons. So this is what helps you start maybe getting a little more waviness in the hair when we start, playing with more of the settings here. Okay? It'll help you with, hey, if I want to create curly hair, I'm going to need more segments. If I'm creating longer hair, I'm going to need more segments. So if I start to just drop this down, you're going to start getting like he's been electrically shocked. But maybe this is the hairstyle I'm going for. right? So if we look at that, it starts straightening out because there's just less segments. And eventually, down to 1, it's just one polygon face, right? And you can see my polygon count now has changed to just 40,000 vertex points, right? So, because now we only have, in essence, one face. And we're going to use this. I'm going to show you how we're going to use this, okay? So, again, I want more segments here because I definitely want to have a little bit more of hair that's falling on him, right? Notice that as I'm adjusting this, now it looks like he's in the wind. So we'll hide my mask. It's beaches. The wind beneath my wings. Oh, if any of you have watched that movie, don't start crying if you have. It gets me every time. So this is happening because the gravity's coming into play. Okay? So that leads me into another one of the rules, which is, in essence, the cockpit here. Right? All these other sliders that will help us to start doing more things with this particular guy. So if I start looking at this and I start playing with this gravity setting, you can see now the fibers are laying a little different. If I actually turn him upside down, say like this, and I touch the gravity, or for that sake, any slider in here that I touch, it's going to readjust the gravity based upon how he is in the world. So you can see now it's standing straight up. So if I was to do, say, something like this, right, and then now touch any of the sliders, it doesn't matter which one I touch, okay, you can see now it looks like he got in a windstorm. His hair is going all one way. Okay, so this is something I worry about maybe near the end. I worry about, well, what direction is the hair going? But you got to think about it. Maybe I can even go negative and see that will shoot opposite, right, gravity. So I'm looking straight in the vertical way of this model, but I can tell I want the fibers to actually just shoot up. Obviously, if I'm pulling the gravity down, you know it's going to pull down more on the fiber mesh. Another important thing that you're also doing when you create fiber mesh that you're going to want to do, and you'll notice it more here. Let me grab the demo head here. If we just want to throw some fibers on this guy and say, yes, beautiful, perfect. He looks great. Okay, notice that there's fibers even being created inside. Right? So you notice all through here there's fibers created inside and there's fibers creating outside. That's happening because we're telling ZBrush to do that. And why we're telling ZBrush to do that and how we're telling ZBrush to do that is down here in our display properties. So double is on. So we're telling ZBrush look at the normals no matter what way to the camera. And because that's on, we're telling ZBrush create fibers based off the normals. And I can look at the normals regardless if it's facing the camera or not facing the camera. So if I turn this off, okay, and then we turn off our preview, you can see that I can't see the shoulders now. It's because those normals are not facing the camera, and then as I turn, it becomes available. So that also comes to true with the fiber mesh. If I turn this on, you can see now the fibers aren't being created inside anymore. This is really important, this rule, because if you have a mesh that you've been playing with fibers and then you just can't get the right density, or you're turning up that max fiber and it's just not working, this might be one of the reasons why is you have double turned on the mesh and you're creating a bunch of extra fibers that none of us will ever see. And then that also creates where you might have fibers look like they're shooting through your model or your mesh. That could be what's causing it as well. So that's really important to start understanding that rule, is that double is important to have. Okay, so let's move on to our bird here again, and let's start doing some more things with our fibers. Okay, so let me make sure I got a mask here. All right, we got a nice little mask going there. We'll open up our fibers and preview this. Now, what kind of hair do I want? This is where all the stuff starts coming into play. Now, you have a bunch of sliders here that are working with the basic rules I've already started with, which is our polygon count, our polygrouping, our masking, our segments, right? That display properties, and now we're looking at, well, what else do you want to have happen here? So you got some sliders right here, which is by mask, by area and embedding. So the by mask is telling ZBrush how much should the fibers pay attention to the mask. So a 1 means pretty much 100%. By area means the polygon size. Okay, so how much should it really appreciate that rule? So it's like 50% appreciate that rule. Okay, and then the embed is just allowing you, I can pull the fibers in or out. So if I do a negative, they start actually pulling off the skull a little bit more, or the head. They're starting to pull away from the mesh. So that's what this embed value will do for you. Okay, so it'll just, in essence, move it in the normal, right? Further away from the normal, or going closer to normal, and then bypassing the normal. But the next thing that is really important is let's start making something that looks a little bit maybe like a feather. So what I can do here is I can start playing with my coverage. Okay, I'm going to drop the max fiber count a little bit so we can really see what's happening here. So I'm going to drop it down. Let's drop it down to 1,000. And I'm going to hide my mask, which again is Control H. Okay, so I want to now make a little bit something that looks like a feather. So this coverage slider, in its essence, is your width. So you can see as I turn that up, I'm getting more width. Okay, so the higher I go, the more width I get here, right? So, and again, this is playing and roll with that segment slider. That's very crucial, very important to me. Okay, so let's continue on now and saying, well, I want to play with the length now. Maybe I want the feathers to be a little bit longer. And you can really see those polygons now here, right? You can see what's happening here. You can see those 16. So if I start knocking down the segments, you'll start seeing, see there's less polygons happening. So this is why this segment is so important. What kind of feathers am I looking for? I'm looking for feathers like this that kind of stand off his head, more like a doo-doo bird kind of thing. Or am I looking for feathers that lay it a little more flat like this? You know, this is where you can see just changing my segments can really play a pretty big role here. Okay, so let's put it at, say, something like 10. So let's put a little more coverage in there. Okay, but what I want to do is change the coverage along each fiber. So again, right now I'm only looking at 1,000 fibers. And I want to now open up this width profile. And you can see right now I've got the profile all the way to the top. So this is saying 100% keep the consistent width along the entire fiber, no matter what I do. Okay. The other thing that's going to help control the width of your fiber is these two sliders right here, your scale root and your scale tip. So if I just turn this all the way up to 10, now it looks like, yeah, don't run in porcupine hair fiber bird. Right? So all it's doing is it's taking the very last segment or polygon and making it 10 times larger. That's what this is doing, right? So by default, you guys would notice it's probably going to sit around like a 0.75 or 0.5, and you can see what that's doing. Just the tip now is starting to become smaller. And then the root is obviously doing that same thing to the root. Okay, so I want to have this control, but I want to have it along the whole curve, right? So that's why we have this. I can start playing with this, and you can see now this is my root side, okay, and then this is the tip. So you can see I instantly now have got a tapering happening here, and then maybe I want something a little bit more like this, okay, maybe a little bit skinnier at also the root and the tip. Now I want to add some volume in the middle, so I just click a point, and I can start adding some volume, and I just pull up, and we start to add a little bit more volume here to the character, right? So maybe I want to add another point and create even more volume here. And now we're going to start getting a little bit closer to something that'll look like a feather, right? And I can even change and make it a harsh point, or I can make it a soft point, whatever I want to do. Okay, so how I'm doing that is I'm clicking on the point, dragging outside the graph, and then dragging back in the graph, and you can see that's creating a harsh point instead of a rounded point, right? So you have that capability in there. So let me show that one more time, just in case the feed is a little jumpy on us here. So I'm clicking, dragging out, dragging back in, and now it's a softer point. And then this big yellow circle is controlling the roll-off of that point, right? So you can see it's like a Bayesian curve, right? So this is the same, this rule I'm showing you, or this feature that I'm showing you, is across the board for any graph that you see in ZBrush. That's how you would move all these points. They all do the same, okay? So I'm going to get to I'm going to get to the question with you with adding a feather alpha. Okay, so I can start doing things like this, right, and start having control. So this is now changing this along the path, and maybe now the tip is a little too skinny. Maybe I want something more like that, and let's make it a little bit more wider, right? And you can see what we're going. Then we can start adding some color. So obviously we have a base color, right? So that's my base, and then my tip, right? And I want to put some tip color in here. And then these two sliders right here are controlling the intensity of that color, right? So you can see that's 100% the blue and 100% the red. And then you're going to get a slight purple in between because it's got to blend the two colors along the fiber, right? So you can start having things like this. Okay, but what we can also do is use the poly paint of the mesh. Okay, so if I turn this off and I come in here and I turn on my poly paint here, and by the way, I just tapped the shift key. I held the shift key down. Clicking on the brush will turn all poly paint off for every single subtool. Clicking on it again will turn it on for all subtools. Right, so here's just some quick paint work that I have here. And then now if I preview this, okay, I want to start getting the color, right, of the mesh below. So that's where this base color comes from. So I'm going to tell it none of this color, and 100% just give me the color that I'm getting from the base, right, and the color coming off of the model, right? So if I go maybe to white here, you can start blending, and I'm going to start getting, and I can even kind of start blending these colors together, right? So I can start doing things like no color, if I don't want any color at all, start blending in some of the color through here, right? Or I can say, no, just give me that tip color, and see now it's grabbing, for the base, it's grabbing some of that green, because that's what I have in the poly paint. So you can actually use the poly paint itself to give yourself some color, right? So this is one way. So I see it popping up already. Another way, when instead of doing all this, right, is to use a texture, right? So I can import any texture that I want. So let's say maybe let's do a black and white. Okay, you're going to get this to pop up. It's asking me, do I want to change the size of this texture? So this texture is bigger than 128 pixels by 128 pixels. I'm going to say no, don't change the size, right? And then now that texture instead is being applied to every single fiber, right? So where that size was asking, if I turn this off, right here you see the 128, that's setting it to be exactly 128 by 128 pixels, right? Because we're populating this maybe across tens of thousands of feathers, not just 1,000, right? So you got to have some control here. I wouldn't bring something in that's like 8K or 6K. You want to keep it in a relatively smaller size because that texture is being used across, right, the whole thing maybe. So again, let's import that black and white, and then like people are saying, I can now tell ZBrush to make the black transparent, right? So I just changed this transparency to 1, and I'm going to throw in an anti-alias, and then there you have it. So now I've got these white feathers, right? And keep in mind, when I render, all this comes into effect as well. So I accidentally had my bridge on apparently, so it's trying to send it to Keyshot, which will go to Keyshot. So it's going to launch Keyshot and send over, you know what, this is a good segment. So something to think about and know about if you guys are using the bridge and you're doing this and you're sending this to Keyshot, this is where you could take a big hit in Keyshot, right? So you can see we're at 2 million triangles total. Part of that is because of the feathers in the FiberMesh right now that are coming over to Keyshot. So I'm going to I'm going to go ahead and close this because I don't want KeyShot. We'll turn that off. Okay. What's happening is when we render, we're not just giving you what you see here. There is actually render settings right here. So you have some render settings that are being looked at when you go to either BPR render or if you have the bridge and you want to send it over. Okay? So right here, we're dividing it twice. Right? So this FiberMesh, to make math easy, right? If it's 40,000, let's say 40,000 polygons, we're dividing that 2 more times. So you can do multiples of 4, right? So we're going to take that 40,000 to 160,000, and then that's going to go to, what is that, 640,000, 700,000 polygons, right? That's being sent to KeyShot. So you got to think, let's just round it down, 700,000 polygons. But then you're telling it also to not be a flat plane anymore. You see my profile is 1. That means to keep the fibers as pretty much a flat plane. Okay? I don't want it to be a flat plane. I want it to have some volume to it. So it's telling to turn it into, in essence, a cube. So now you got to multiply that 700,000 by 4, right? And that's giving us, what, 2.8 million? And now double that number in KeyShot, right? Because they're doing triangles. So now you're going to be seeing around, what is that, 5.6 million just for this fibers that are only 1,000 fibers being made. Now think about if I crank this up to 10,000 fibers, 20,000 fibers, how many more polygons you're sending over to KeyShot. So this is very important to understand. It's also important to understand that when you're rendering just in ZBrush, because when you go to render in ZBrush, the shadows are appreciated by this texture. Everything's appreciated. But when you go to render a fiber, you see that they have a little more volume to them. It's because of these, what I'm doing here. Right? So if I crank this down to 2, right, and then now I render this, and again, Shift-R is the shortcut to render. Right? See, they look flat again. But you see, they look a little bit smoother. It's because I'm dividing them twice. So it looks a lot better. It looks a lot cleaner. It looks more realistic now because I'm doing it at render time. Okay, polymath, right? I am a human ZBrush calculator. No, those are easy numbers though to calculate. So this becomes very important to you. And the other 2 sliders above this is controlling, in essence, the normal and how it's going to lay down. That becomes very important at render time, especially the material that you're picking, right? If I go and grab a different material, there are some hair materials here that we ship, these 2 right here. They're very shiny, right? So you're going to get a different result when I render out, right? But if I start, so you see how shiny that is? I would use that maybe something on like a human hair. I probably wouldn't use it on these feathers. I'd probably stick with the basic 2 material that I have. But these anisotropics sliders are helping control that shininess. So what they're doing is, in essence, is how does that normal lay down as the fiber is being created, right? So if you look at every one of these, right, each fiber has the same number of segments, which is 10, right? And I'm having it have different sizes, though. But those 10 segments, if you look at the normals, they're all shooting off a certain direction. At render time, I'm actually telling the faces towards the tip to start laying more flat. So almost like start laying more on top of themselves. So that's why the tips could get more shiny because they're laying on top of themselves. And if I start doing the same thing for the root, when I go to render this, I'm going to create even more a more shiny feather looking piece, right? Because now I'm telling also the root polygons to kind of start the normals to start laying on themselves. Sorry to get so technical, but I know I might have some techie people in there, and I want to make sure you guys understand with that. So obviously, I don't like this. I'm going to stick with this material. It was looking pretty good. So besides doing, obviously, an image like this, we can grab any image, right? So even if I import a colored feather here, it's asking me again, do I want to resize this to 128 pixels by 128 pixels, because that's what the slider is. I'm going to say no. And then now I've got this feather being populated, right? And then if I turn again on my transparency, and I like to turn on an anti-alias, there we go. And then I go ahead and I hit BPR, and let's see what I get. Boom, there we go. And this is kind of the feathers I kind of liked for the guy. They're a little different, you know, they're nice brown feather. Now, if I did want to change maybe the width of this, it's all about the texture now, right? So you can see the width is 324 pixels by 480 pixels, right? So if I just made this feather be wider, it'd become wider. In fact, if I just did this, if I re-imported this color feather now, and I tell yes, go ahead and change the size, you can see the feathers get a little more fat, right, to them, so they're a little different being spread across this piece. Okay, so now if I turn on this transparency, you'll have a slightly wider feather. So obviously if I made this really wide, you're going to have that effect coming across here. So now if we render this out, we can see what we get. So we can create feathers this way by just going and playing with some of our settings here, our length and our coverage. Okay, and we're going to get into more of these settings. Don't worry. We're going to continue looking at these settings. I'm just looking to see if there's any questions I've missed so far coming through here. And I'm going to take a drink with my handy dandy ZBrush mug. Okay, so now let's look at a different way to create the feathers. If I want to actually use geometry to do this instead of using a texture and using just the sliders, right? So let's look at it and go, all right, let's get rid of the color completely for now. So we're just looking at the gray. Let's reset our width profile. So we've got something like this, and let's go ahead and make it consistent all the way from the root to the tip. I want to make sure my scale tip and my scale root are the same, right? So we've got now this length, and it's blowing in the wind. So maybe we'll add a couple more segments, right? Makes it a little more flat. Okay, and then maybe I want to even add a little bit of twist. Maybe by a twist of 3. So it starts twisting them a little bit, so it creates a little more realism. Okay. And I want to now tell ZBrush to, instead of using just the fibers here, okay, I'm going to use them as kind of a guide for geometry. So I'm going to accept this. Okay. And now this is a subtool again. When I hit accept, we've just created a subtool. Right? So we're now creating different types of fibers. So if I go back to this and I preview this, right, I can get these exact same fibers again. And then maybe I want to bring back that texture and import and say, give me that colored feather. And I'm saying, no, don't change the size this time. Keep it as is. Let's throw an anti-alias and transparency on, right? We'll keep that at a transparency of 1. And then I accept that. You now have 2 subtools, right? I have the subtool now that has the texture being applied to every single feather, and then I have the one that is just consistent feathers happening. Now, to keep a note here, when you are creating these, especially when it goes to something with the fibers, there's something special happening. So if I click on this, right, I also am keeping the UVs. So if I go down here in my texture map, you can see the texture actually gets moved to the texture map, right? And you can see I actually have UVs. And in fact, if you forgot, right, so like this mesh didn't have a texture on it, so you can see there's no UVs, I can actually click this button right here, Fiber UV, and I can actually put UVs on this guy, and now I can assign any texture that I want here. And I can do the same thing, transparency and anti-alias right here in the texture map. So even if I forget that a texture, or if I want to add a texture later on down the road, I can do this. Okay? So I know a popular question, and I saw it come up, decimating this. You could, but not really, because again, I've only did 10 segments, so each fiber is only 10 polygons. So it's already not a lot. It's just I have a lot of the fibers. So you could definitely try decimating it, but you're only going to be able to decimate it so far because it already is so low polygon per mesh. And think about it, the decimator is going to look at each individual fiber as its own polygon count, right? And then if I'm telling to drop that down, right now, whatever I have, so what do I have here? I have 28,000, and I'm telling it to go to 1,000. I'll probably start losing a lot of the form of volume that I created with. Okay? So I can either UV during the fact of creation or UV after the fact of creation. It doesn't tile the UVs, it's overlapping. That's why the one texture is being applied to every single fiber. Right? So all these UVs are living in the same space. Right? So that's what's happening here with these. They're all they're stacking on top of each other. Each fiber is sitting in the 0 to 1 UV region. Okay? And then the next one's just stacking right above it. So that's what's happening. Okay? So moving on, I don't want a texture on this. I don't want even UVs on this. I want to use something else. Okay? So I'm going to use this actual feather instead. Okay? So looking at this, I've ZRemeshed it. Okay? I've also gone to deformation and unified it, so it sits within the perfect unified space of ZBrush. Okay? So I've got this feather now. And what I want to tell ZBrush to do is take this feather and populate it across the actual FiberMesh themselves. Right? So I can click now on this piece. Okay? This is being tagged as FiberMesh in ZBrush. So that's how we can also click on that UV, Fiber UV button. And there's going to be more things I'm going to show you guys that we can do here. Okay? So besides this, I'm going to go into geometry. All right? And I'm going to use micromesh now. So just to give a gauge, because there might be people in here that don't know micromesh. Who doesn't know micromesh? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Let me see it. Raise it high. Higher. 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 Good. Okay, so all micromesh is doing is it's looking at your polygon count, okay, and swapping it out based upon the polygon count. Okay, so in the tool geometry, there's a button here called micromesh. This is going to allow me, I can click this, and I can grab any piece of geometry. So I can even grab this feather. And now it's going to tell you, hey, this is a rendering thing. Okay, so I can say, I like the hands that are popping up now. Nice, nice, I like it. Interaction. I like this. Okay, so I hit OK. And now, okay, that doesn't look like anything's happening. But what you got to do is you got to go to your render palette. Okay? And then you want to go in your render properties and you want to say draw micromesh. And you can see what's happening now if I zoom in closer. Every single polygon is getting that feather now. Right? So I'm going to turn off the polyframe and then watch what happens when we render. Boom. Now every single polygon gets converted into the feather itself. Here, I'll get closer and we'll render that out. And mind you, all shadows will work, all the ambient occlusion, anything in the render settings in ZBrush, it would work with this. So you can see each one's getting that feather. So handy dandy, very useful. Okay, and there is a way to convert these feathers actually into the geometry so we can start playing with it. But I don't want to do that because think about this. I'm only playing technically with 1,000 polygons. So I can switch to say something like, you know, this move brush and start deforming this, right? And the polygons that are being stretched, the feather is going to take on that stretching. Right? So I'm going to really stretch this stuff out here. Okay? So I've got craziness happening over here. I got a little bit of distortion here. And now let's see what happens with the render this time. This is kind of where the base of also nanomesh came from, which is one of the chosen topics for next Did You Know That? So you can see these feathers are getting bigger because the polygon itself is also getting larger and these are staying small. So this is the beauty is I don't need to actually turn it into real geometry yet. I can manipulate and mess around with this however I want. Okay? So with that said, instead of doing this on a piece of geometry, I want to do it on something that is actually inside a ZBrush. This mesh is tagged as a fiber mesh. So when you guys hit that accept button, all these subtools that I've created here, that looks pretty cool, right? You can get a little mixture now of my fibers. Oh, yeah. So you can see the layering here. It looks really nice. You're starting to get a little difference here. You can see how much you can start doing with this. Back to this is every one of these subtools is actually tagged FiberMesh inside a ZBrush. So what happens now is if I decide to do a micromesh with this, so I'm going to click micromesh and say along the feather, okay, and I render this out, instead of it going to every single polygon, which was AKA the segment, it's being stretched across the actual fiber. And then there you have it. So now it's actually using the physical geometry of the feather. So think about this. If you created a bunch of different subtools that are, you know, different looking feathers, you can pick and choose what you want. And then the beauty of this, right, is this is going back to that one rule. If I know I'm doing this ahead of time, I would start polygrouping off sections, right? And then those polygroups become subtools, and that's maybe where a different feather would go. Right? So you can have whatever mesh you want. But when it's an actual fiber mesh, okay, that's using this. So if we did something crazy like the demo head, and who doesn't want a head of demo heads? Right? But think about maybe the Medusa, right? You want to put the snakes on her head. Here's a quick way to do it. Right? Really fast way to do it. So this is now using the demo head, which keep in mind that demo head's polygon count, right, was something around, I think it's sitting around 54,000 polygons, if I remember right. So those 54,000 polygons have to be put across the 1,000 fiber meshes that I have. Whereas that feather I had made wasn't very dense, right? It was only around, I think, 1,000 polygons. So the render is going to take longer now because of this, right? So this can come in very handy, and I found many ways to use the fibers. I'm going to show you another way I like to use fibers to get to something. I'm just looking at the questions right here. Did I miss anything? How to make it? Just catching up on the questions. Okay, looks like I'm getting to everything. So we'll let this just finish off rendering. And again, the shadows are also going to take place of this. So every one of these fiber meshes are going to have the demo head. The shadows are also going to update correct with this. So you can see why all these rules I started with become to be an important understanding is what's my polygon count that I'm making the fibers on? Do I really need to crank it up to 10,000 fibers, or is 1,000 fibers going to be enough? How many segments am I making? All this stuff really comes in to play. Okay, so I see there's a battle happening between IMM brushes or ZModeler. How about using them both? They're a family. Work together. Together. I always forget that there's a webcam now. I got to remember this. So I'm used to just being wild and crazy in front of my own screen. So we'll let this finish up. It's almost done. And then you'll see the result we get. We're almost there. It's so close. There you go. And that looks pretty funny. Right? So there you have it, right? So now I've got 3 ways in essence to create a feather. I can use the fiber mesh itself, right? So we were in fiber mesh using just the settings. I can use a texture, or I can do something like this. So if I want to convert this into the geometry, right? Let's go back and change this micro mesh. I'm going to turn off the micro mesh, turn it back on, and select the feathers again. Now, if I want this to be converted into geometry, there's a way to do that. But the reason why we're having this happen along a render is so I can render something relatively quicker and take a look at it and not marry myself to the result. I can kind of see, all right, I want them to be a little more wide, have more width to the feather. So this is all I have to do. I'm going to turn off the micro mesh. I'm going to go back to the tool that's the feather. And I'm going to do something that might not look right, but I'm going to stretch this feather right? So visually, this doesn't look right here. But you got to remember, this is being stretched across 10 polygons per fiber, right? So let's take a look what that looks like now. So I'm going to come back to here, micro mesh that, select that feather, right? So if I turn on the polyframe, you can see the feather actually got wider, right? And then let's render that out and see what that looks like. So I went back to the mesh itself and changed its parameter and then reapplied it to these fiber meshes to get a different result. And you can see I'm getting a lot wider. This is now starting to look more like leaves than feathers, right? I've gone too far. I've gone too far. Come back, my Keanu Reeves. You've gone too far. Come back. Or to Arnold, take it to the chop, get it down. Get the John, get the feathers down. Okay, so forgive me, but I got to do this crazy stuff. It's who I am. So I can say, it's a little much. It's a little excessive. Let's go a little bit smaller. And let's go ahead now and reapply these, turning my micro mesh off, turning it back on, selecting it. Let's take a look what we have now. Okay. Let's see, there is a battle there for the next topic for sure. Boom, see? Now maybe this is more what I want. And if I'm happy with what I have, and now I want to convert this into the geometry and not have it be the fiber mesh with the micro mesh going over top of it, okay? I can now just hit this button right here, this convert BPR to Geo. So that's all I got to do. I press this, and then ZBrush is taking it, and now you can say I got 2.8 million, and then now I've got the physical feathers. Right? So this is, if I turn on the polyframe, you can see what I get. Right? So that is a way for me to create feathers that can actually become physical feathers, because maybe you do want to export it, and then this is something I would decimate to go ahead and export. There is no way to keep the fiber mesh intersecting on itself during the creation process. So there's obviously grooming that you'll be able to do that has collision states, but right now there's nothing you can change to have where you've got some of these fibers going in there. So I might play with this though, but I would probably switch to say something like the Move Topological brush, for an example, and say maybe I don't like the way this feather's sitting. I'm going to go to a really large, massive brush size, and I'm going to just pull on that feather. And you know what's nice about the feathers? I actually can't, right? See, I'm only pulling that, right? So I can use this to actually update this. This is a great way to even making maybe card hair for video gaming, right? If you think about it, it's a great starting. And then using this brush to start putting different volumes. And I'm using the Move Topological because then I know that's going to move one feather at a time for me. If I switch to the Move brush, right, and do that same thing, I'm changing the whole volume underneath that brush. I don't want that. I only want an individual feather. So I'm selecting on this Move Topological, which this is turning on a particular setting, right, so that we can do this. Right? So in the brush palette, down here at the bottom, there's a topological. And you can see the mask by groups is also still on, so I'm going to turn that off. This button right here is in essence looking at moving just based upon geometry shell. Right? Because each one of those feathers is their own geometry shell, so they're all going to be able to be moved individually. So, but this can be used, that topological can be used on any brush, right? So if I even took, here just to give you guys an idea, the ever popular tangents of Paul. Let's divide up some here. Let's fill him with some color. Who doesn't want a red dog? All right, let's switch to the standard brush. Let's fill that with some color. Okay, so by default, right, I can just paint wherever I want. No problem. Okay, if I decide, no, I want you to restrict the brush movement here. Okay, so I want you to restrict it based upon topology. So not only can you use this to, in essence, move individual parts, okay, you can actually use this on even one mesh to limit the brush's capability of painting. So you can see I can't paint any further than this. So see, I'm way over here, and it's not painting. Right? This is as far as I can paint. I can't paint any more than that. Okay? Clifford the dog. Nice. Yes! Yes, actually, I've been starting to read Clifford the dog to my daughter. It's funny how the things rush back into your life that you remember as a kid, and you get like super excited. You're like, I can't wait to show her like Goonies or Princess Bride, right? Or just line the Disney movies up. Lion King, Aladdin. It's so funny. Okay? So this is looking at the geometry and the brush size. So by turning this on, there's two sliders here. So there's a range, which in essence is the topology, the furthest range I'm allowing based upon that draw size. So it's saying about 5 times more than the draw size. And keep in mind, the draw size is not the big circle, it's the little circle, right? The little circle is actually your brush size itself. The big circle is the roll off, right? So, but that little circle, so it's allowing me in any direction go about 5 times larger. And then it's looking at the surface and applying this. So if I go up here and I make a smaller brush size, you can see I'm limiting myself to even more. Things like that. Right? So I'm bringing this stuff up because it becomes very valuable. So even looking at this, if I move back, blue hair, love it, blue feathers. If I move back to this move topological, right? We know now that we're moving it a bit by bit here, right? What I can also do is make the draw size 1, and now I can move the whole piece separately. So again, just make a draw size 1 for this particular brush, and I can move any one of the feathers I want in space individually. And then this will work with any mesh. It doesn't matter what it is. We just happen to have the feathers. So I can take some time now and start tweaking these, right? And maybe make them have a little pulling off, and that creates a little more realism that we're looking for. Okay? So now we've got our model with some white feathers. Just gorgeous. Wonderful. Right? So you can see my gravity was pretty intense there. A little too much, in my opinion. Okay? So another thing that we want to do, and I want to look at for this as we move on here, is how about a tree? So this entire tree, okay, is made from FiberMesh. Okay, so here I'm going to turn off the leaves. And you can see the variation that I have here. So even this tree trunk, right, this is fiber. Okay? And now, because this is, I can still mask like this, right? And all I did was I masked off the tip. And then I told it, okay, to make some more branches from there. Okay, and then I actually put a sphere in the middle because I wanted branches to kind of go in multiple directions. I wanted this tree to kind of have a rounded look to it. So then I created branches that were based off a sphere. So you can see, look from the inside, you can clearly see, oops, this was based off a sphere. Right, and I just told it how many to do. Right, so if we did it, so let's insert a sphere. Okay, and I'm going to say, all right, let's turn on this so we can get a kind of gauge here. Let's go ahead and let's center that and let's rotate and size this down. So we'll make it a little bit smaller. And let's go ahead and rotate that. And now let's move this up and say something like this. But think about it, I'm doing something that's just leaves, but think about it, I'm just using a totally different piece of geometry to help me drive this. And you're going to see in a minute here why I also do this. Okay, so I'm going to turn perspective off. Now I'm going to say just mask up here and we'll blur it. Right? And then now I'm going to go to my FiberMesh. I'm going to say go ahead and preview this. Hey, nice bow cut. All right. I used to have this as a kid back in the day, since we're going back to kids. Okay, so I want to manipulate this and have it look a little different. I clearly don't want 50,000, right? Probably it looks like 1,000 or maybe even 800. So if I put 0.8, I get 800, right? So you see now I'm sitting at 800. I definitely want more length to them. Okay. I definitely want more coverage. It needs to be a little bit thicker tree branches. And now I can start seeing, okay, 800 is a little excessive. Maybe 400. Still maybe a little excessive. Let's try 200. See, this is the point of the preview. We can sit here and play with this and figure this out, right? And then I can say the gravity, not so strong, so they stick out a little bit more. And then let's add a couple more segments. Okay, so now I'm getting a little bit more of a droopness to them. Okay, and then there's even a twist happening. I can say not so much on the twist, maybe just a twist of 3. So think about twist as like wringing out, as I do this, wringing out a towel. Where revolve is more like you're lassoing something. So if you had like a rope and you're lassoing it above, so it comes in really handy for curly hair, and I'll show you, I'll load a curly hair and you can see that example. So again, twist is more like doing this, and revolve is more like doing this, and then like there's something revolving around above. Okay? So this is looking pretty good. All right, but what I want to do is now actually add some profiles. So I'm going to put a profile of 6, and you can see it becomes a lot more rounded. So I'm telling it to be more of a cylinder, right, and not flat. So let's play with this width profile maybe a little bit and have it taper just a snug, just a smidge, right? And maybe it's tapering a little too much for me, for my liking. And the tip is just too small, so I'm going to put that at 1 so that can stay consistent. Okay, and then now I got something like this happening. And then now I say, okay, let's go ahead and accept that. And now I've got a new fiber mesh based upon, right, a sphere. Now, masking can be used, right, to create fibers. So if I'm now trying to create fibers on top of this, if I just do this, it's going to happen across the board equally to every part of this fiber. Maybe I only want the fibers to happen at the base or at the tip. Okay? What we can do, because it's a fiber mesh, and again, it's tagged in ZBrush, okay, that it is a fiber mesh, I can actually go to masking, and there's a section called mask by fibers. And then there's a graph that helps me control things. Okay, so if I say, I got this graph and I say mask by fiber, you can see that the roots got darker. So if I start even colorizing this, right, so let's switch to the standard brush and RGB, and we'll go with a really big brush. You can see I can paint just only the tips, in essence. Right, so even if I just did a color fill, you can see that the roots aren't being colored. Right, and then I can inverse this and say now maybe let's grab a red, color, fill object. Right, and then see now I've colored these. Okay, but you can use this to mask off, right? So I can use this mask by fibers, and now only the tips, right? But I can make this more extreme by playing with this graph, right? And then I'm making a completely different masking. It's becoming more tight, right? And then of course, if I reset this and flip it vertically, you can start getting the opposite. Now the tip is masked, and now I can start playing with this and keep messing around with this and go less or more by this graph, right? And you can start playing with that. Now, there's the fiber unmasked. Here, I'm going to reset this. That's meaning if I have this mask. So you can actually mask off a whole fiber. Hold Control and just tapping on it will mask off the whole fiber. Right? It's an easy way to mask it off. Okay? If I do now fiber unmasked, it's looking at the meshes, the fibers that are masked, and now unmasking based upon the graph. Okay? So, in essence, that's all I did for this tree. Okay, so if we turn these ones off, and we'll go and turn off this, all I did was made a parent-child relationship. Right, so we'll turn off, let's see, those are leaves, they're small branches. Okay, so let's turn these off and go one at a time. So you can see there's the mask I used, right? Then I created these from that mask, right? And then these I created from a sphere, so I could have different branches. So these branches are coming more up, and these branches are more sticking more out in a circular pattern, right? Again, remember when we started this, it's all about, it's easier if you create multiple subtools. You'll get to the end result a lot better. Then I said, okay, I need to make small branches. And then now there's my small branches. And I made the small branches only off a certain part of the tip. So I used that masking feature that I just did, right? And then I created leaves. But notice the leaves. They're just a single polygon. So what I did is when I went to this and I wanted to start creating leaves, right? We go to our FiberMesh and I hit preview. Okay, we're going to turn down the colors. If you look, I'm getting almost like very square little rectangle. And what I've done is, again, that rule, segments, I turn my segment down to 1. So that means 1 polygon. I told it no profile to means a flat plane, right? And then I've said, let's find a length and a coverage that works. Right? So I want full 100% coverage, right? My profile's got a slant, so I can even do this, so it's perfect. My length also has a profile. I can reset that, so it's perfect. And then now I find a length, and I can make them smaller, and they'd be more squared or more rectangled. It's all based upon what I want to have happen here. So for me, I found for this particular piece, a length of 50 with a coverage of 5,000 with the graphs kind of where they're sitting, created a really nice section for me that looked like section of leaves. So watch what happens now. If we go to this leaf part, right, and we're looking at the fibers again, right, I want to start putting a texture on this. So we've forgotten to UV this. So I can go UVs and fiber UV, click a texture, hit green, anti-alias, transparency. Let's zoom in. And now I've got, this is just an image from the internet, right? I can't get any more real than that because it's an image. So I can now, I want them to be orange leaves, right? Anti-alias that, transparency. It's autumn. Or maybe I want yellow leaves instead, right? So you see, I just have now a couple different textures. Then of course I can populate this and make, some be yellow, some be red, some be green, whatever I want. Right? I can start making, think about it, different subtools that are different color leaves. Right? So even after the fact, I still have the capability to edit, and now you get something that looks more like a tree. The green looks very nice on this guy. Let's throw an anti-alias in here. Right? That looks really nice. And then when I render this, right, you got to remember all your settings for rendering is going to come into play. So now I can hit, let's see what we got. Let's turn on the floor. Oh yeah, I was creating this in an awkward way. Go me. Okay, so I probably want to turn on the Z floor like this because I created it along the Z. Right, and then I'm going to make the floor grid bigger. So I'm going to make the grid a little bit bigger. That way when I'm rendering, the shadows will cast on the floor for me. So when I hit that Shift R, it's going to take on all these fiber meshes, the leaves, the texture is going to take on as well. And then the shadows see are casting on the floor. Right, and remember, there are settings coming into play for each fiber mesh, right, that's being used in our fiber mesh section. Okay, so I open this back up again. We've got our render settings right here. Whoops, I went click happy and turned it off. Right, so these right here for every one. So this particular one, do I really need it 4 sides? No. Do I really need it divided? No. So I'm saving myself render time right there, right? Because I'm just doing a flat plane with the texture. The texture is driving everything. So why bother subdividing up and why bother having that be 4 sides? doesn't make any sense unless at render time I don't like what it looks like. Then I can go play with that. And then there you go. That looks fine to me. Right? But if you want some thickness, then you can turn up, okay, that. Oh, you didn't know you can change the floor grid. Oh, yes. So in here, you got your X, Y, Z coordinates. You can turn on all three if you want. Okay? So that's all I did. I just saw that pop up. And then the floor lives in the draw. So I'm just making the grid bigger because I knew that I would need more grid to cast the shadows in here. So that's what's doing that. And here at the modifiers on the bottom, if you guys want, you can actually turn up the framing of the floor. Right? Which is also going to turn up your axis lines to be a lot darker so you can see them. So that's all I did there. Make sense on that? Since I just saw that pop up. Okay, so the FiberMesh you can see is extremely powerful to the point that you can even export a vector displacement of your FiberMeshes as well. And what we would do is we will export only a single plane. And if you bring that into your rendering application, you'll be able to use a vector displacement, and then you'll get the actual FiberMesh look that's coming off. So you have a plane, but even though in ZBrush it's maybe got like a fiber coming off it, you will get a plane in, say, your external application. And when you bring in that vector displacement, you'll actually get, when you render, the FiberMesh that you made inside of ZBrush itself. Okay, so that's those settings. There's your BPR. We talked about exporting. This is just exporting these, okay? And it's telling you, hey, this is going to export 52,000 guides. So it's telling me, you know, it'd be better if you turn on preview and drop this guides way down and then export the curves, right? And see, now I'm down to 7,000. So how many guides do I really need? Right, maybe this, and said export. And I say that's fine and hit OK. And now you can see I will get, oops, an OBJ, a Maya file, Lightwave, Modo, or a FMG file. And then that can be used as a guide in an external application. Okay? So again, when you're sending this to Keyshot, right, if I send this to Keyshot, right, whatever I have in here, right, that's going to Keyshot. But again, because these are fibers, all right, it's also looking at these settings. So if I go up the chain here, see this one is giving me fibers, but it's going to subdivide it twice, and it's giving it 4 sides. So you got to do that math again, right? So if this mesh right here, right, I've got fibers on it, so I can preview them. These are just the leaves. I was showing you how to make the leaves. Okay, but this is got how many polygons? So this is sitting around the 445,000 polygons, so 500,000. So you're going to multiply that twice. Again, multiplying is by multiples of 4. Subdividing, I'm sorry, is multiples of 4, right? So 4 times 500,000 is 2 million. Now you're going to go 4 times 2, 4, 16 million, right? That's all got to get sent. And then now you're also telling it to be 4 sides. So you're going to want to maybe play with these settings before you send the fibers over to Keyshot, right? Maybe I don't want this particular branch to be 4-sided, and one subdivision's enough. Go up to the next one. Oh, I'm not sending that. I'm not sending that. I'm sending this. Okay, one subdivision will be enough for this. One subdivision level will be enough for this. And one subdivision level is enough for that. That's the tree bark. And the reason why the sides are off now for some of these is because when I made the fibers, I told it to have a profile. Okay, so what I mean by that, if we go back to this piece, right? I'm going to turn the floor grid off. If we're looking at this, right, the minute you turn on in the modifiers, you turn on this handy dandy profile, this no longer becomes available. The minute this goes back to 1, this becomes available. So if I know I'm staying pretty much in the ZBrush world for the most part, the Keyshot world, or I'm just going to use these as guides, there's really no point in putting up that profile slider. Unless you're trying to create fibers like I was trying to do real tree branches. Then that's why I put the profile up. Because I don't want it to happen at render time. I want it to actually be physically making a tree branch with some roundness to it. Okay, and the minute that profile goes up, you'll no longer be able to change the sides because you're making now a physical geometry of the fibers to have some volume. So as I go up, it just becomes more and more round. Does that make sense? Did I lose anybody there? And make sure you vote on what the next topic's going to be. I see a hot race happening here. Looks like Z-Modeler's starting to take over. Okay, and again, if you guys have a topic too that you're interested, that's what this whole segment of Did You Know That's about. Again, this is something I started like 8 years ago, and I'm bringing it back. Bringing it back. And I want us to be able to learn features together. Okay, so you got to be able to let me know, hey, there's this feature, and then we can add it to the pool, and then you guys will vote every segment. So I'm on again for Did You Know That this month on the 28th. So whatever's picked today during this poll is what we're going to talk about on the 28th, and then we're going to continue that theme. Okay? So I think that's pretty much it for the FiberMesh. We've been going now for an hour and 20 minutes, so I'm all about any questions that you guys might have now that I can answer for you that I may have missed. Fire away, and I'll go ahead and ask those questions. If there's something you want me to touch base on again with the fibers, just to reiterate it and understand it a little more clear, now's the time. Please throw that in the chatteroo. Oh, you're grading student projects at the same time? Nice. Are you teaching CG effects animator too? Is that what you're teaching? Teaching ZBrush and many other things, I'm assuming. Let me just make sure. And again, please get those votes in because that vote only stays. And then Hyperwave, did I answer your question about sending stuff to Keyshot? Does it make sense? I want to make sure, Hyperwave, that you got your question answered as well. Okay, and then again, you guys can use this for fur. You can use it for whatever you want, right? So if I even think about it, here, I'm going to show you some examples of the user base. Here, I'm going to show you a cool one, right? Think about dreadlocks, for example. So a user actually did that, right? Look at this, right? Using stuff like that to create in FiberMesh. That's FiberMesh, right? There's a lion using FiberMesh. And I know someone did a tiger. See, that's all FiberMesh. And see, look, think about this separate subtools, right? Different length here that you're going to have. There is a dreadlock tutorial using FiberMesh. Let me find it. Here's me using, see the butterflies? Right? Someone using FiberMesh there to create rips. Who doesn't love Star Wars? Let's see. I know there is a tutorial. There's Daniel Byestead, even doing things like this, even the grass and the trees. So actually, let me show you one more thing about FiberMesh that I didn't touch base on. Let me find, it's usually right here near the, here it is. Right, so you see these are FiberMesh. Right, and so is this. So there is a tutorial on ZBrush Central, okay, of him walking through this. Right, so you just put ZBrush FiberMesh. You get there, someone using FiberMesh to do tree roots. Okay, so the other thing that I didn't mention yet is you guys also have presets. Okay, so if I look again just this, right, and I turn on preview, I can actually go to Lightbox, and then there is fibers right here. So remember I told you there's curly hair? There's some curly hair right here. So if I select this, right, it might not look very curly right now, right? And let's look at the fibers here. Let's look at what's happening in the cockpit of fibers. So we've got a texture giving its color. We got the segments turned all the way up. We got no profile. At render time, I want to keep it 2 sides, not 4. Okay, you can see the coverage is kind of small, but I got a long length. I've got 20,000. So let's see what that looks like rendered. So this is just building this up, okay, and thinking about curly hair. Now the beauty here that I'm about to also share another understanding here is the segments also gets used with the length profile. So let that, boom, there you go. There's the render. I gotcha so glow. What movie is that from, people? I gotcha so glow. There you go. You got curly. And look, your shadows are also giving the curly wavy hair. Right? So this is all based upon I've got segments really high, so it actually can revolve around itself. So you see I got the revolve around 122. And again, the length is relatively long, small coverage. And then the profile coming to America is right. Okay, and then so this length profile is actually helping control where the segments get moved along each fiber. Right, so if let's crank this way down like this, and let's actually make the coverage be longer. So you see how it's kind of flat at the root? Because I don't want that to be curly, and I don't want to waste the segments then. The profile is controlling this. Right, so you can see as I'm playing with this profile, it's changing the curl. Right, so if I go this way, right, it's more the segment, that first couple segments are staying flat. And in fact, there's only a couple segments making that, and more of the segments are going along the curly hair. So this graph of the length is working with the segment. So of course, if I reset this and it's just flat, it's just consistent. See the difference? It's just really trying to make now the revolve go around everything. But I can say, no. I want kind of that to work a little different based upon the length. Right? So I'm actually moving the segments up and down the FiberMesh right now. It'd be like me going to the ZModeler and going to slide and slide edge, and I'm moving the sliding edge up and down, but I'm moving all of them together, kind of in a cohesive unit, is what I'm doing right now. Right? So there you go. There's another thing. But then you have all these crazy, right? There's some grass, right? Who doesn't want rainbow sticks? And then there's this crazy stuff that, maybe could be very useful on a character. And remember, when you load them, remember to render. I said remember twice. That's how important it is. Lisa needs braces moments for those that know. Because the render time is what really is going to take shape for the fibers, right? Because then you're playing with your render settings. So it's really important to whatever one you select here, right? If I select something crazy like this, you'll be like, that doesn't really look like much. Render it out, and you'll actually see what you're going to get, right? And that's looking more like, I don't know, some kind of pieces you're putting on something, maybe some grass, right? These ones would be good to look at. So you see they just look very straight, right? But watch what happens at render time. I know you can use this on a character or something. See, they become actually more cylindrical, more round, because see, I have the sides are turned up to 12, and the subdivisions are turned to 3. Right? So this would be like the same thing if I said, okay, how about instead of the sides here, how about I just change the profile to 12? Right? So now I'm getting a profile of 12 segments wrapping around. I'm sorry, it's 12 pieces going around the polygon. So there's 4 segments and 12 profiles. So when I render, right, instead of the sides telling it 12, I've actually said, hey, the mesh itself, I want to have 12. Right? So you can see it's a little different. It's not exactly what I was looking for. So I prefer to have this sides to be at 12 and then render that out. Yeah, FiberMesh can absolutely be exported with a game-ready mesh, right? If you think about it, you can even use FiberMesh to create, like hair cards, a good start, a good base. I'm not saying you're going to get perfect right off the bat, but I could definitely get a good base. But remember, you need to keep your polygon count obviously at a certain level for a game, right? So if I want to create some game hair for him, and remember, I would do this in segments, right? I would do this in, there's different lengths, right? And then I would even probably create a hair card insert mesh brush as well. Okay, so let's say something like this. I say FiberMesh. I say preview. Nice. Okay, that's definitely a little aggressive. Okay, so the length is a little much, right? I need it to be a lot wider to be a hair card, so my coverage, right? And you can see my profile. Let's actually reset this so it stays consistent. Let's reset my length so that's more of a consistent length. Okay, and now start playing with my coverage more. And then let's say I need more segments now. Okay, let's say segments of 10. And then now let's actually start putting some length in. And let's drop the polygon count way lower. Let's say maybe 2,000. And right now there's a big twist happening, maybe no twist. And now start maybe pulling it down in gravity. Right? And I can start playing with this. And as long as you're keeping this at a relatively good number, you can export this to a game engine, right? I'm going to probably need more coverage. Let's even go wider and go wider, right? And a lot more length. Whee! Right? Yes, perfect. There. Happy little trees. Right? And then let me reset this gravity profile. Now we're getting this. And remember, double's on, so that's a no-no. We don't want to have double on this guy. So we're going to turn double off. And then now we're going to preview it. Right? And then now I can start saying, okay, the gravity's a little much. And this is what we're getting now. I'm playing with that length. And now this is 44,000 vertex points. So now you got to find that right setting. Right? Maybe 300. Maybe 100. Right? That's not enough. Maybe I want 200. There, that's enough. Right? So then, yeah, this could be exported. Okay, does that answer that question? I forget who was answering that. Cardboard Katana. Nice. I like the name. Does that answer your question there? And then I did get the question about the key shot. I forget the user that it was, but I got your question right. I answered it for you. And again, all this stuff will go over, right? And remember, if I was to send this to KeyShot, right? I don't even have to accept it, and it'll go to KeyShot. So this sides is going to go to this fibers and the subdivision levels. So if I decide to render this now with the KeyShot, okay, and I BPR this, it's going to launch KeyShot, and it's going to send all the fibers over. And then this hair card, I would create an insert mesh brush. Okay, so in fact, when this gets done sending over, right, and there you go. See, we're at 228,000 triangles. And see, it's becoming too rounded because I have the profile set to 4. So if I don't want that profile to be like this, then I need to go to ZBrush, go back to ZBrush and tell it, no, I don't want it to be 4 sides. I only want it to be 2 sides, and then resend it. Right? Which is also going to create less polygons, and there you go. There's the update. Right? So all of it goes over to KeyShot. And in fact, this hasn't been created, remember, too. I'm actually in preview mode right now in ZBrush. It's not actually a created mesh. So that's a benefit. I can go back and forth. Right? So thinking about, again, you guys could even use, right? If I even thought about it, create a brush like even this strap brush. It's already got thickness, and I can do this. Right? Oh, I need not to have subdivision levels. And then I can do this. Right? And I can control this. Right? And then this is snapping to the surface as well. So you can see how they're kind of moving. if I don't want them to move, there's things I can do. Tangent! Here we go. In the curve, you can lock the start and lock the end. Right? So when I draw this out, if I start trying to move this, you can see that start won't move. And if I want to change the size, it's just changing the draw size and then tapping. I'm changing the size. Okay, but with this brush, you can only have one curve drawn out at a time. So you have to tap, and then you can draw your next one. Then you can tap, and then you can draw your next one. And you can tap, so forth and so on, right? And it's got thickness, right? And then each one's getting polygroups. Okay, so you could do something like this if you wanted to as well. But also, if you want to have multiple curves drawn out at once, okay, I could do something like, so let's get rid of our subdivision levels. Let's go ahead and grab that handy dandy curved tube, snap. See, I snap. It's probably loud on your end, sorry about that. So we're going to grab that one, and this is what I get when I draw out, right? It's more of a cylinder base. I'm actually going to tell ZBrush in the brush palette. In our handy dandy modifiers, I'm going to say brush mod to be 4. There you go. And then now when I click, I get squares. Right? So see that's squared. And then the height, I can actually control that with some Z intensity. And see, I can in essence recreate the strap brush. But now I got this brush, right? So think about it. There is a brush that's curve multi-tube. So I could do this same thing, right, with this brush. You can say, oh, I don't want it to be cylindrical. So brush modifier 4. And let's drop the intensity maybe down to 25. And then, boom, there you go. And then now I can actually draw multiple curves. So I can kind of play with this curve if I want. Again, see the lock to start and end's not on, so I can pull it right off the mesh. And I don't want that maybe. So you might want to lock the start. Right? And I can play and I can add to it if I want to. And manipulate these however I want. And then I've got multiple curves drawn out. And if I wanted to snap to the surface as I'm moving things, that's what this snap option's for. So see, now it's going to snap better to the surface. Right? So as I move, it's going to try and keep them snapped to the surface as much as wherever it can. Right? And if I just tap, all the curves get deleted and those stay, and now I can maybe draw out the next phase. Right? See that snapping? It's also snapping to the other fibers that are sitting there. So you guys could go this route, right? Which is a little more tedious, but you might have a lot more control what you want. Right? And again, that wiggle that you're bringing up is happening because of the snapping. Right? So I've turned on this snap. So I turn this off, right? So you don't get the wiggle. Okay? Cool. Does that make sense, everybody? But think about it. You can create your own insert mesh brush. So what's winning right now, boys, for the next topic? I'm intrigued. What is that? Is it ZModeler? Seems to be the winning. 42% of you want ZModeler. Only 5 for creating insert mesh brushes. Well, the creating insert mesh brushes would be this. Creating insert mesh brushes along a curve as well and looking at all the tricks that you can do with that. Tune shading would be fun to do. So like I'd teach you guys how to just, might as well show you kind of little topics here. Let's see. We want this one. If we put my name and put Gundam. So for an example, I thought it would pull up. Here's my Gundam that I did in ZBrush with ZModeler and a couple other techniques, but I rendered him out to be more like a toon shade. I thought it would pull up like this, but apparently not. Here, let me see if I can find it. Here's a keyshot render of the head. But I want to show you guys the toon shade. All right, well, now that I say it, now I want to go find it for reals. One of those things like, this is my tangent killing me. Let me see. I might have it in ZBrush Live folder. No, it doesn't look like I do. I don't, or do I? Nope, I don't. I don't have it here. Huh. Well, I guess it's not popping up in, I'm going to try just putting my name. Maybe it'll pop up this way. Oh man, there's some old school stuff popping up now. I can't find it. Oh well. Maybe, here, hold on. One last thing. Let's try my ZBrush Central. I should have just pulled this up before our meeting, but I didn't think I'd be showing it. Okay, here's my thread. Here's the Gundam. And again, this is all ZModeler, primitives, topology brush. Those are robots. It doesn't look like I actually even put the render on here. Oh, well, sorry, I don't have the render of him in toon shaded. But that's what I would have also covered in that section. These are all Marshall robots last year that I was doing with Mr. Dressed. He's not here. Oh well, sorry, I don't have it. So that's what that would cover in the Toon BPR, and the nanomesh is nanomesh. So it looks like ZModeler is our winner. Okay, did you find it, Kingsley? Oh, Kingsley found it. So there's a link. There you go. Kingsley finds it fast, but not me. There you go. So this is what I'm talking. This is all ZBrush. The only thing that's not ZBrush is this. Actually, no, wait. I think I actually made this ZBrush. So this something like this is what we would look at doing. A picture of Matt Damon does. Nice. Okay. So that's it for me. I'm done if there's nothing else. Thanks for tuning in to the first Did You Know That? Looking forward to the 28th. We'll be looking at ZModeler and going through the settings there and building some stuff from that. And then we'll have new topics that you guys can vote on later on. Did I miss any questions? Kingsley, Kyle, Joseph, anybody else? Effects and animator, hopefully in 2 weeks we can solve your ZModeler issues, and we'll spend the time just looking at that. Again, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget Michael Poplovich is going tonight as well. He's at, I think, 6 o'clock p.m., if I remember right. So make sure you tune in for his as well. My next broadcast is going to be, again, the 28th. So the Did You Know That will always be on Tuesdays, and right now they're set up to be every other week. So there'll be 2 a month. So right now I'm set up to go the second and last Tuesday of every month. And then Joseph's going with the Ask ZBrush, the first and third week of every month. Cool. All right, guys, have a wonderful evening. For those that are maybe in Europe, for those in the East Coast, enjoy your lunch. Those on the West Coast, enjoy your lunch. All right, thank you so much. Have a great time. Okay, bye-bye.